Hello, welcome back to another episode of Soul Sessions, a Jungian coaching podcast. I'm Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
And we are continuing our series on relationships. And today we're talking about romantic relationships, masculine and feminine, as Jung would call it, the Anima and Animus. If you're ever intrigued by the archetypes, masculine and feminine archetypes, this is the episode for you. And before we begin, I do want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast. Just click on the button to subscribe. If you're listening to us, watching us on YouTube, click the button in the corner here and you can get subscribed to our channel. We want to hear from you and see you every week with your questions. So let's talk about the love, Rob. We don't know anything about that.
Well, last time we started with this idea of projection, how the ego really protects itself, and one of the main defense mechanisms that it uses is projection. Now, this is going to play into romantic relationships big time.
Oh, yes. And we actually just did a class this week, and I said, the projection that we feel that falling in love is really coming from the ego. And people were just like, really? Tell me more about that. So I like to think of the ABC of a relationship. There's the attraction phase, there's the bonding phase, and then there's the commitment phase. So in the attraction phase, that's where the projection is. The bonding is when the projection starts to fade and we're working through that disillusionment. And then the commitment is the work to, okay, I'm taking away my projection of your idealized version of yourself, and I'm really accepting you for who you are, and I'm ready to commit. So some people only get to that attraction phase, and they keep moving from relationship to relationship. I lost the spark, got to move on. Or they never get to that bonding stage because of their own, for me, that was afraid of really opening up to someone else. So all these stages are about personal growth. And relationships are the most powerful, romantic relationships, powerful path to your own self-development and self-actualization.
And one of the tragedies that I see is that in our culture, we emphasize this attraction, infatuation stage, and we think that should be the rest of our lives, that we should always be infatuated and in love and in this powerful, attractive way, and that if we're not, that we failed at our relationship somehow. So that's a tragedy because that's unrealistic. No one can sustain that, and we're not meant to. As you know, I love that you talked about these three different stages. That attraction should go into a bonding stage where the couple is now more kind of serious and more engaged in making it work and putting in the work, right, of developing themselves so that they can make the relationship work.
If we stay in that attraction phase, we're not seeing that person for who they are, and we're not even letting them see us for who we are. And it's just a false kind of sense of love. It's not real. It's kind of a fluffy love, like a romantic comedy. So let's talk about attraction and why it's so powerful. Like, why do we have, and we talked about projection last time, but attraction is that form of projection. But we're going to go deeper into the Anima and Animus, which is very unique to Jung's work of what we're actually projecting onto that other person.
Yeah, so Jung kind of, and I'm taking some liberty here with his work, but this is the image that I get of Jung kind of conceptualizing somebody falling in love. So you're going about your business, and then one day you see someone who just floors you, right? You can't believe such a creature exists on this planet.
Their hair is blowing back.
You hear the music and you hear the angels singing, and they just represent everything you've been looking for. They seem to promise you heaven. They seem to kind of help you get out of your own self, right? You're now connected to someone in this incredible way that you're able to transcend your ego, right? Or you feel like you're outside your limited ego self.
It's almost like the ego is not is like overridden by this power, like well, the fears about intimacy or self confidence or self-reflection and like insecurities go away because you're just like it like almost like in a dream, right? In a you're swept away.
Yes, you're experiencing the archetype of the anima or the animus, depending on the projection, and it's a powerful experience of the power of the psyche. That's why it is so powerful. According to Jung, you're caught up in almost possessed by this archetype, so that experience feels transcendent. You're no longer yourself. You're no longer your limited ego persona self. You're now experiencing the divine in you.
So the masculine would be the animus, and so for women, it's typically unconscious, the opposite. The masculine, feminine, the opposite of what you're presenting on a persona level. So Rob would have an anima, I would have an animus that I'm not aware of, that we would project onto each other. So I am this idealized version of a woman, and he's the idealized version of a man, and almost like not even like a typical human, but almost like a superhuman, like the goddess. You're the goddess, or you're the king, and it's just this wonderful, like unearthly experience that you have, and that infatuation, and it feels so good. Because you're really, I think, because you're lifting yourself out of your ego. Yeah. But also, I think, is that this part of us, it remains unconscious. And then it's becoming conscious through that other person, through that projection. It's like we're seeing our own divine self in that other person, the other half of ourselves that we don't acknowledge and love in that other person. And we're just like, we feel complete, right? You complete me, that idea. And it's a wonderful feeling, and I think it's addictive, right? We get addicted.
It is very similar to a drug experience. But Jung says this is not meant to last. It lasts a couple of years perhaps, but it's not
sometimes not that long.
Yeah, it's not meant for us to stay there and to define that as the totality of a relationship.
Well, the reason is we don't want to project our power onto this other person and be infatuated with them that we don't have any of our own power. We're thinking they're the source of our happiness, so they're the source of our love, and I can't live without them. It's almost and then they can't live up to that ideal. It just can't last.
So the second phase in this projection then is the disillusionment. The projection begins to fade, right? We start to see the human being behind the projection, and we're disappointed. We feel almost betrayed that you told me you were somebody else.
You were perfect.
You fooled me you tricked me into falling in love with you, and now you're someone else. You're not what you promised. I mean, this is, of course, the cartoonish or explanation of it, but it holds water. We've experienced it. We've all experienced something like this, right?
And so that go ahead.
Yeah, where the object of our adornment, of our adoration, now becomes our disillusionment.
And so what happens is that we talked about shadow in the last episode. We're seeing our shadow. We're seeing all the things that we reject about ourselves in that other person. It starts to show up. So we see all the light, but now we're seeing this kind of, the things that we don't like. If again, we're irritated, we're about our body in some way. We're going to notice that in our partner, like, oh, look at them eating so loud, or they're not neat, or they don't tell me they love me enough, and you start to see them less as a god, and then say, God, they're so critical of me, and that's all. A lot of it is projection. And then the bonding stage is the ability for you to reclaim the projection in yourself and then be able to share with that other person what you're projecting. And like, I'm feeling this weird thing. And you have those conversations. But again, you're always coming from, I need to do my work first, and then I can approach the relationship and know how to handle it and communicate. And through that, there's a deeper vulnerability that happens, a softening, and the other person doesn't feel like they always have to be so perfect and they can't make a mistake, and they can just be themselves and you can be yourself. It's such a beautiful type of relationship, and not many relationships can be like that because most people don't do shadow work. But that's that stage that we get disillusioned from this like unrealistic expectation of the partner, and then become more realistic. But the love is still there. So you never get rid of the attraction. You shouldn't. You're just going to attraction plus bonding. And it's a deeper kind of attraction. Now, don't you think it goes beyond physical? I think initially it's more physical or more compatibility. And then there's something deeper. It's like a soulful connection when you start to bond.
Oh, that's a good question. I never thought about it that way. But I'm almost thinking the opposite, that it's very psychological in the beginning because you're projecting your own idealized version of the archetype onto this person. So you're not even seeing the person in their physical form. You're experiencing
kind of like an ego projection of.
Well, no, this is much deeper. The archetypes come from the collective unconscious. So you're experiencing your collective unconscious.
So a psychological event.
Yes, very much a psychological event. And it's when you start to see the physical person that disillusionment sets in. But I could be wrong, or it could be that some people experience it that way and some the other way.
No, I feel like we're saying the same thing. Okay. So it's that unrealistic expectation, because the ego is not conscious of its own anima or animus, so it's projecting, and it doesn't have access to the collective, so it's seeing this kind of a magical creature that's externalized. And then by going through the psychological bonding and going through the shadow work, you're starting to kind of see the person for who they are. But through that, it's like a process, right? You're seeing first all the things that annoy you, and you have to work through it. And then you start to see that deeper soulful connection. Again, like it's almost like you see the animus, or anima, but it's covered over by the ego's projections. And then as you work through it, it's almost like you're teasing out all the ego stuff. And then what you're getting at the end is that anima, the pure anima, that's like untainted, undistorted.
Yes.
And then
you're talking about somebody that's actively working on becoming more conscious.
Yes, it doesn't happen automatically.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but I think that you can start by, if you're in that attraction phase or you feel like you've lost that loving feeling, as that old song says, you start to ask yourself, what am I projecting onto this person? Again, get curious about what's triggering you about the person versus that judgment of they're that way and I'm seeing it the way I see it, versus asking yourself, am I really seeing it that way? And getting curious.
Yes.
And then sharing with that person what you're experiencing and being vulnerable so you can both talk about it and experience it.
Yes. So another tragedy that I see is that people think of relationships as work. They always say it's a lot of work. It's hard work. You have to put in the work, that kind of stuff. And of course, everything in life requires some kind of work, right? But I think what they're missing is that if it's work for you, you're acting out of ego. You're still kind of in the kind of me versus them in a sense, right? That you're always...
It is a lot of work to be projecting, and you're like fighting yourself. You're having fights with yourself through that person.
That's right. So that if it feels like a lot of work to you, you're probably still operating from persona ego, and you're trying to make it work, and you're doing your best, and it might work actually. You get it to work, but it's exhausting because you're having to work at it. Love shouldn't be work. Work is work, right? Going on to the world and doing stuff, but relationship should be more nourishing. When the relationship is good, you feel empowered, you feel nourished and supported by the relationship.
Not walking on eggshells, not calculating in your mind when you need to have the talk again and repeat asking for things that you never get. It's interesting when you say that. So many people think of personal growth as work as well. And I always say, if this is work to you, then you're not doing it in a very productive way. If you're doing personal growth and you feel like, oh, I can't wait for this to be over, it's too much work to work on myself, then you're probably just rearranging the furniture. You're kind of fighting yourself again, dealing with projections, or getting to some place where you feel like you need to be an idealized person that is perfect and that doesn't have flaws and that doesn't make mistakes. Personal growth is that you're just in a constant growing, learning mode, and it should be fun. It should be interesting, just like a relationship. So if you're approaching work, we did relationship coaching for many years, and every once in a while we get people that said, I can't wait to get done with this work so I can find love and not have to do personal growth anymore. I'm like, what? You're doing it to get the thing, and then you're going to end up working in that relationship if you don't do your own self-reflection. And the shadow work is so critical for this, to get to that really beautiful, intimate place.
That's a good point. And that personal work begins by withdrawing the projection. And that simply means, like, instead of believing your irritation or your trigger, your emotional trigger, you're questioning it. You're asking, what role am I playing in this situation? What is my part in this situation that is triggering me? Instead of simply buying into the projection and saying it's her fault, right? That she's annoying me, or she's doing this and that. Well, you want to ask yourself, what is my role, and what can I do about it to make it a creative opportunity to grow the relationship? Because if it's all about blaming and getting back at your partner, that relationship is not going to go very far.
And so when we talk about anima, animus, and masculine, feminine, Rob and I came up with a great way to describe it in a very easy way for people to understand. I know for me, I just couldn't. When I first started learning Jungian psychology, anima, animus, they sound so much alike. So which one is which all the time? So we think of the anima as love and the animus as power. So the anima is the feminine principle, the archetype. And archetype, it just simply means it's a universal pattern. So in all of nature, there's the yin and yang in Eastern philosophy, the Shakti Shiva. There's a lot of dualities in lots of different cultures and experiences. So the love for feminine is not like feminine from a gender perspective, but from this idea of emotion, creativity, passion, intuition, the creativity. When you think of love, you think of like nourishing and beauty, nature, and power. Do you want to talk about the masculine?
Yeah, by power we mean more personal power, the confidence, right? The sense of ability, of self-efficacy, your sense that you can go out into the world and do things, that you can create for yourself and be responsible for yourself. That kind of power. And
also the spiritual power, that you are the source of the world, like both of them, actually. You can act in ego and be emotionally triggered and use emotions and infatuation from the ego, and you could be the emotional one, but it's not really true love. It's lower, like an ego level love. And then the higher level of love is where it's just pure, and you're not like in that, you're not coming from your personal experience or about you. It's just the pure expression. And the same thing with the power. It's not, I get the power by controlling others or having power over others. It's more that I own my own power. The locus of control is within me. So when we think about power, it's the will, it's the movement. Like you said, it's that personal power. And we need both. So culturally, are the sexes were, conditioned in a very different way. I mean, society for millions of years, women have been the love. They've been the creative ones. They're the ones who created farming and the relationships. They have to bear the children. And the men were the ones, the active force. They were going out hunting and fighting the wars. And then there's this kind of weird in our society where men are the leaders. And why is that? It's because unconsciously we've been falling into these archetypes. But I think now women are getting more power, and it's about how do we work with these archetypes in personal relationships, because we see that power struggle too with relationships, but also in society where women and men we're not competing with each other, right?
Yeah.
Most of what we see is the ego level, masculine, feminine, and competition, and who toxic masculinity and all those kind of ideas.
Yeah, because if we understand Jungian psychology correctly, what he's saying is the individual needs to balance these forces within him or herself. In other words, every individual has to do this balancing act within yourself, balancing your heart and your brain. Instead of, kind of letting one lead, you have to become conscious of these two elements within yourself and harmonize them. When you do that, then the relationship becomes this beautiful attraction, bonding, and commitment experience.
So, for example, you had told me when we first met, we talked about relationships a lot because we were teaching it. But you were saying that there's women become the container for love for men, like the emotion. The woman is in charge of the emotions of the relationship. When they're not conscious.
When the individual hasn't done this internal work of balancing the anima and animus in themselves, then they need the external to provide that for themselves, so that the man needs the woman to bring the emotions. And it's almost like saying, I'll do, the work and the providing.
I'll just show up and pay the bills.
And you do the emotions, right? I won't feel, I won't share my emotions. That's your part. And that is very unfair to everyone in the relationship, because that's not going to work. It's only going to work in theory or on the superficial level. Both partners have to share their emotions. Both partners have to be responsible for making, the household work and all this stuff.
Well, as a woman, this idea that we in a relationship, when was dating early before you, and there was I didn't do my shadow work yet. I would get a lot of men feeling and maybe projecting onto me like I'm so independent, and they didn't like that I had power or that I had money and I was successful. And I almost felt that I didn't want to, I had to, my family life, being the mother and the submissive woman, we have all this conditioning around having power as a woman. So integrating the animus, I know for me, I'm very kind. I want to be kind and generous, but sometimes we need a little animus energy to help us balance out both, will and ask for things, and also be kind. And it's not one or the other. And so with relationships, if a woman feels that she can't, or she's diminishing the man by owning her power, or the man feels he's diminishing the woman by being emotional or something, it has to be a balance. So the other person, I always find that in every relationship, unconscious relationship you see, there's usually one person in the relationship that's the more emotional one and the one person that's the more logical one. And it's weird how you're brought together because you're projecting those parts of, the things that you aren't accepting about yourself onto the other partner so that you can integrate them. It's like they're there, but they're not there. They're just a container holding the space and the reflection, but how do you integrate both? And that's really, I think, what makes successful marriages and successful long-term relationships is when both people are in touch with their own power versus expecting the other person to live up to the things that they lack.
Absolutely. And in that regard, then a relationship then really serves as a platform for personal development, which we'll go deeper into on our next episode. But relationships are really meant for us to grow in. They're not meant to be hard work, struggles, or compromising. It's really one of the best experiences that we can have, but we need to come to these relationships with our own kind of personal integration already done, or us at least willing to approach the relationship as that.
Yeah, even us, we met 20 years ago, and I had just learned about shadow work from you. So there was a lot of work I had to do. But that's, it does, like, I think a lot of people think, and I thought, that you have to have all your work done before you meet the person. But I felt like I grew more in the relationship than I did when I was single. I felt like I had more to work with and more reflection. And of course, I had a partner who was into psychology and open to change and spiritual and all the things we love. That it was the best, fastest way to grow.
Absolutely.
And so, just to review, the attraction is always that first projection of the Anima Animus. The bonding is that opportunity for bonding happens during the disillusionment, when the walls start to shatter of this beautiful person. Like, the great powerful eyes now becomes this little man behind the curtain. You're like, oh wait, that's just a little man behind the curtain. It's not really this thing that I projected onto that person. And then you start really working on your own individual relationship with either your anima or animus. We do this in our coach training. We also have this in our private coaching membership, that you can actually go and work with on a deeper level. So when you do enter a relationship, or whether you're in one, it's going to last. You're going to get to that commitment level, and it's going to feel less of a commitment out of obligation, but a commitment out of choice. And I think that's the biggest. I think a lot of people, most people, get into marriages and it's just like an obligation versus a real conscious choice that you choose to be with that person every day. And not complain about it and think it's so exhausting to be with this person. Yes. So love and power, making sure they're balanced within you. And next week, we are talking about
spirituality.
Yes. So we're going to go to another level with a spiritual relationship and how to make it last.
To next time.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.